This dude, I don't know what Ben Johnston was doing when he thought of this, but it's of all the effort that goes into the music, every layer of effort that goes into that music, it shows. It shows. It's incredible. It is a, for lack of a better word, a rhapsody, honestly. And this is coming from someone who, like, I'm a lover of classical music. I just don't follow it. It's I don't follow it enough, I should say. I'm a lover of music in all sorts, and I can find as much enjoyment in this Ben Johnston's quartet as a standard pop, you know, chord progression. So I am not by any means an authority, but it's such. I think the layers of difficulty um, in involved and like how much lore, so to speak, is steeped into this string quartet is part of what makes it just so viscerally moving for me to hear. Knowing that someone, at least however many people are playing this quartet, whether they're doubling to have eight or just four people, um, just alone the work of the performers makes this an interesting listen to me. Let alone all of the work that Ben Johnston, the composer, has put into designing this, and it's literally designing this music. It's not just standard music theory writing. He built a scale out of the overtone series. And by the way, the overtone series is the neatest thing if you ever want to go digging on that, because like I said, each note has a constituent set of overtone notes, and I barely touched on this. You can generate a computerized note that does not have any overtones, but you can also do the inverse. You can play computerized versions of each of, some of the overtones of a note that don't contain the note that these overtones spawn from, and these notes mix together, and since they're overtones of this this bass note arises from your ear. Like it'll start with one overtone, and they'll play a second overtone, and then they'll play a third overtone, and as they play more overtones, the note that these overtones come from comes out of nowhere into your ears. It is the coolest thing, and I really wish I could use it in. Honestly, I'm tempted to learn how to do it and use it to make the Frozen Tundra Finds intro a little more interesting. Like, write something a little more complicated jingle wise, and under the whole complicated jingle have an overtone build a note, because it's such a cool effect. I want to learn how to do it. Ben Johnston's String Quartet 10? Are you sure it's the String Quartet? I don't know, man. All I know is Ben Johnston built his own scale. Which quartet it is, uh, feel free to correct me. It's probably one of those. Let me just Google Ben Johnston and see what comes up. Ben Johnston. Ben Johnston, one of the foremost composers of microtonal music. That's actually probably the more accurate term rather than the overtone scale based music that I was blithering about. It's technically microtonal music, which makes sense because it's on a microtonal scale like other non-Western scales. It's telling that we call any tone less than a half step a microtone. Oh, you don't know for sure, you just like this one better. Okay. Um, in just intonational tuning, 4, 5, and 10, his string quartets were based on folk song idioms, which makes sense. Traditional forms, few variations. Most of his later works using extremely large number of pitches. Forms. Cool. Intervals of the harmonic series as high as the 31st partial from number 9. So it sounds like he kind of it sounds like he kind of like leans into this trope of defining his own scales based on either the mathematics of sound or based on certain intonations in particular of current scales. He likes to lean into that spiel. He really likes to lean into that, so that's cool. Um, Most of his works utilize A440 as industry standard as the tuning note. He taught composition and theory at a couple of universities before retiring and running into a bunch of avant-garde music figures like the 422 guy, or it's not 422, is it? I don't know, the X amount of time of silence guy, if you know who he is, John Cage. He's the guy who wrote a piece of music that's literally just rests for an X amount, for a set amount of time. Um, the whole point of that piece is to make you, you know, remove some perceptual layers, perceptual filtering that's going on, so you can hear the world around you a little bit more. It's neat. Don't get me wrong. It's neat avant-garde music, but like, man, really, it's like seeing a piece of modern art in a museum where you go, "Oh yeah, I could have done that," and then you go, "But I didn't." So points for doing it first. You know, it's that kind of thing. Which is a lot of modern art for me. A lot of the time, I'll look at modern art and I go, I can't draw to save my life, and I could have done that. And then I step back and I go, but I didn't, and this person did. So points for getting to it first. You know, it's like, good job, you got there. Your artistic process got you to something that looks inherently simple, but nobody else has done in particular, even though it seems glaringly obvious. It's interesting. That's what interests me about modern art. Sometimes it's glaringly obvious, but also so glaringly obvious that nobody's done it, and this person had the uh, whether it's skill or will to step forward and say, "This is really obvious. Why is nobody doing this? I'm gonna do this." You know, it's cool. Um, blah 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 blah. It's got a lot of biographical information that's interesting. He's been commissioned by a lot of really big names. He's been mentioned in some books. I don't know. It's cool. I love weird music. John Schneider? Who's that? He said, as if he said, committing some kind of faux pas somewhere. Uh, yeah, this guy, Ben Johnston, I mean, uh, he was big into the difference between, like, different intonations of the Western scale in particular, honestly. Like, it's talking about, like, there's a difference between diatonic major scales and Pythagorean major scales and just intonation and Ptolemaic intonation and like 5 billion different little differences that even to a trained ear you gotta think about it. Like, as an example, um, oftentimes, a piano is tuned one way. Whichever it's called, it's tuned in one way. It's they're gonna be traditionally tuned in that way, and probably until the end of time, unless someone goes out of their way to tune it a different way. Pianos are tuned one way. Voices, the piano has arisen as a tool for a vocalist to take their tones from and like to practice with to get an idea of where the music goes and stuff. So, vocal tuning kind of leans on that, but at some point in the process of, learning music, you can develop enough of a mind's I'm stealing this word phrase from my choir teacher at Ambrose, by the way. You can develop enough of a mind's ear to have your own uh, not necessarily incorrect scale, but you have your own perception of the scale, and that perception of the scale meshes with other vocalists who have enough of a mind's ear for that perception of the scale, such that your intonation as a group can change. And it can oftentimes, if you have enough of a music muscle memory, so to speak, it can oftentimes, your intonation can change to make the song sound better. Like, as an example, before they really standardized pitches, a lot of really old music was actually, often intoned differently than the modern intonation. So, what's a piece we did at college? Oh, like, not Poulenc, he's too recent. What's his name? Anyway, like, hang on. I know I have some music in a folder here. One moment. The camera's going to be empty while I rummage around for music. I guarantee you I have some kind of sheet music with the right author in it. No, not in that book. Is it this one? Ooh, I love knocking things over. Is it in this one? No, that's just a soloistic piece. Now my folders here. It might be in here, honestly. Anyway, like, not necessarily Hondo, because that's, soloistic piece. Sarti, kinda. Like, anyway, composers of the same or earlier, the um the phrase I'm looking for is pre-Renaissance, like almost medieval music. Very old music in particular. Actually, despite being, transcribed into the modern scale and transcribed into a modern progression, um it doesn't necessarily sound it sounds fine, it works in a modern intonation, but if you spend long enough a cappella, your intonation, based on what you know sounds best or what you want the piece to sound like, can change. And when you have, yes, really, when you have people who have been musically inclined for a long, long time, they still stay, within, a quarter, an eighth of a step, a quarter or an eighth of a step of the actual note, but it's enough of an intonation change to make the music quarterly and progressively as a whole sound different. So, the biggest one that comes to mind for me is Baroque intonation. It's a joke it's a tiny little baby music theory joke in music theory if you go, oh man, I'm gonna act like I have perfect pitch and say I'm singing A, and then you go, over to the piano and you hit an A and you're slightly flat and you go, oh man, I'm practicing my Baroque tone, haha. And it's such a niche joke, but it's a real thing. Certain before, especially before A was standardized as 440 hertz, there were wildly varying A's that, even though they use the same the scales would use the same intonation in an area, since the A's are different, the music was written differently because it sounded differently. And this concept of knowing what is different like this actually arose from seeing period instruments, believe it or not. Uh, this is where my knowledge gets fuzzy, so don't quote me, but as far as I know, if one were to look at an era appropriate, let's say, violin from Bach's time, the structural differences in the violin, if you know what you're looking for, I wouldn't, because I'm not a violinist, but if you know what you're looking for, it could suggest, based on where it was commonly played, where it was made, what era it's from, it could suggest a different intonation of the note in which it plays its scales. And that's actually how we know that, because, you know, over time, music trends change. Over time, they standardized in on 440 hertz as the true A, and, you know, the rest of the A's were forgotten until people got really up close and personal with, you know, period violins like Stradivari, and just out of curiosity, why it sounds so good, why was it, you know, engineered so well, they found that uh, the modern 440 hertz A is not the only A to ever exist. And it's really neat to me that it blows my mind a little bit, because I personally have trained my ears pretty well to work within the Western A440 scale. And then to hear someone go to microtonal music or go to a different A, where individually the notes sound like trash to my ear. Like if you played like a scale on a microtonal guitar, as an example, the scale by itself, it makes me cringe into next week, and it sounds like there's almost every note is like very slightly sharp or very slightly flat, and it makes me want to like throw my headphones across the room. And then they start playing music that is designed for this scale, and I go, what? This works? Why does this work? I can't believe this works. What is happening? You know, kind of thing. And we would have moments like that all the time, not on the same scale, of course, but we'd have moments like that all the time in chamber choir, where we would get a note at the beginning of the rehearsal. You know, the the accompanist would give us a note at the beginning of the rehearsal. We'd practice for a good long while. About halfway through the rehearsal, you know, we get to the end of a piece, and the professor goes, all right, let's check our intonation. And as we were singing, like, the piece sounds wonderful, and like, it sounds great, but when the accompanist plays the chord we ended on, the entire group, as a group, is the same amount flat. But the music still worked wonderfully for it, because the entire group went flat as a group at the same time. We didn't like have one person flat, one person slightly more flat, one person sharp. We all moved as a group in our intonation, so the music sounded differently but still good. And I think that's really interesting. And another thing that really blows my mind about the human ear's perception of pitch is that as a vocalist, you actually have to change your pitch as you get louder, because if you were to sing the exact same pitch as you got louder, you'd go out of pitch. And that's not just because of the mechanics of the voice. Um, that's also because if you play a sine wave, if you play a sine 440, right, at one volume, if you start it at one volume and turn it up slowly, first it'll sound like A at a certain volume. Then as you turn it up and as you turn it up and as it gets louder, it falls out of tune with the A. So volume actually functionally is a part of how pitch is perceived. So that's why it's difficult to say generate a perfect pitch that you know is exactly the pitch you need without knowing it's going to be played at this specific volume. That's why A440 is only A at certain volumes. If you blast it too hard, it isn't A440 anymore. Which is, well, like functionally, it's still 440 hertz. But to your ear, it is no longer A440. Even if it is still A440, it's like a perceptual thing. And I think that's super cool. But yeah, the whole group, as a group, we would adapt to, especially when we were given particularly old music. And when I say particularly old, I mean like medieval, like like between medieval times and pre-Renaissance music. Like I really wish I could remember at least one of the guys' names. Um, Hang on. There are recordings of my choir. Uh, and I can tell you that they exist. So let's go to. I'm gonna go to YouTube on my own computer screen here, and I'm gonna tell you the name of at least one of these composers because it's gonna drive me nuts if I don't. Okay, let's go. Come on, Saint Ambrose Chamber Choir. Oh, Totus. Oh, that was. Anyway, I think Totus was old enough. No, that's the university chorale. That's not old enough. I'm sure there's one that exists. Gosh dang it. Anyway, like, why can't I remember anything? This sucks. I can't remember any of the composers' names, and that's really embarrassing. I'm sorry, but I'm sure they exist. Oh, cool, the Ambrose University YouTube. That should have something I'm looking for. Maybe. Or it might just be nothing. Cool and good. All Dateline SAU. That's not necessarily nothing. People put work into Dateline SAU and they go for it, man. Which is, fair. Come on, man. I know this exists. I know you have more of these. SAU TV. Mike Magistrelli show. I didn't know they uploaded the Mike Magistrelli show. Dang. Thanks for telling me, guys. Would have gotten in on it. Yeah, but anyway, I'll find it on my own darn time and post it to Twitter, honestly. I don't want to sit here and, blither for 3 more hours while I try and find the thing, he said, as though he's not scrolling to continue to try and find the thing. And yet he persisted. Come on, man. I know you have this. Come on. I know you guys posted something with the choir. What I'm surprised about is they didn't like post anything about the radio shows that people did. Like, yeah, my radio show the first time I didn't do anything special. It was just music, but my second time around, man, people were like coming up to me on campus like, "Wow, I can't believe this is a thing you can do on the radio here. I thought it was just music. I love your work," which was weird. Which was very weird, honestly, to have people just while I was out on campus come up to me and say, "I love your work. I love your work. I love what you're doing with paper cuts." It was the strangest thing. It was a real head trip. Oh, dude, they've posted all of the B-roll from like the archives of the school. Oh my gosh. Oh, oh, I didn't know they had all this B-roll. Man, I have some sounds to get from this B-roll. But that's for my own time. Is this my time or was this before me? Oh no, this was Dr. Campbell's pieces. And this is when they did it before, when it would have been before my time. So anyway, I'm blithering about choir a lot this time around. Also, yeah, man, we got 65%. Also, I guess I've made my decision about going to sleep at 11 instead of 9. Decision made, I guess. My work, it really depends on which work you're picking, my dude. My choral work, good stuff. Especially the high level, like, chamber choir stuff. There's some great stuff in there if you can find recordings. Good, good stuff. There's some stuff I've done with concert choirs as well, for that matter, that I was a big, big fan of. Heck, there's things I did in high school chorally that I'm a big, big fan of. Like, some of the All-State stuff, that still holds up, man. Good stuff. Like, the roof from All-State, from one of my All-States, for sure, was beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful work. And that's from a choir of 600 people, if you can believe it. When you hear the piece, you'll be like, "That's 600 people, really?" Well, it was 300 people because it was just the dudes in the choir. Another piece that I loved and will love probably for the rest of my hearing life, from Allstate, is "I Carry Your Heart." Um, I have stories about that piece, and I might as well tell at least some of them while we're waiting for this to download. Um, and one of the cheesier ones is my ex girlfriend, who was my girlfriend at the time, was feeling a little jealous because there's a lot of girls at the All-State practice camps, and she was like, "There's all these girls," and I'm like, "Hon, first of all, you don't have any reason to be jealous." And she's like, "But I am, and I'm not necessarily jealous. I'm just worried." It's like, do you? And like, I understand. I understood at the time. I was like, I get it. You know in your brain that you have no reason to worry, but yet you worry. That's just how the human brain works sometimes. And yeah, when you think of a choir, you think of like 30 people singing in a church. I get that. 600 people, 300 people, that's unusually large. That's from the entire state of Iowa. Um, and that's and the thing about 600 people being in that choir, it's still like a 2 to 3% acceptance rate. That's how many people try out. It's hard. I've talked about Allstate before. It's hard. Like our auditions process is hard, and then there are other states that have even more difficult audition processes. Like there was a guy in college choir with me. He was from Illinois, and their All-State process is even harder than ours. It's like it was crazy, something crazy absurd. Like you had to memorize scales and get handed a piece the day of, and like there were district choirs that you had to get through to get to Allstate. It was hard. It was crazy high vetting process. But anyway, back to the embarrassing stories about I Carry Your Heart. This ex-girlfriend whose name I won't mention, but I will say I've mentioned her before. Um, Also, I think she was in a couple videos, but that doesn't narrow it down. That's all of my ex-girlfriends were in at least one video on this channel. It's just a matter of whether it was in this channel proper or in the Year Zero content. But I digress. You guys can play the guessing game all you want. Some of you might know who it is, just from me telling this story. But anyway, I'm at this Allstate training camp. I have a shirt from said Allstate training camp around here somewhere, but it was at a college a good ways from here called Wartburg. And they run an Allstate camp every year that runs 3 days, and those 3 days you do nothing but sing the Allstate music to practice. And it's right at the beginning of Allstate season, right when they release the music. So it's a big deal. And that year, the director of the Allstate choir was the director from Wartburg College, who also directs that camp and directs all the choirs at Wartburg College. Because the Iowa All-State Choir every year is a different guest director based on, and they get picked based on, a lot of this and that. Are they a teacher in a big school? Are they do they do this thing? Do they do that thing? A lot of stuff. There's auditions for it, I think. But I'm not a master of all that, so I won't get into it. But anyway, this Wartburg camp, it's 3 days, and you're on a college campus, with, hundreds of other big, huge music nerds just like you there to sing for 3 days. It's a wonderful time. And anyway, to assuage my poor then girlfriend's worries, I was the cheesiest possible, like the cheesiest possible person. Um, and I was like, listen, there's this song, and the song is called I Carry Your Heart. And I blithered about the lyrics for a little bit to her. And I was like, this song makes me think of you for a very specific reason. And I was like very earnest about it. And the poor girl standing next to me, who was a close friend of mine, now she's more of an acquaintance, unfortunately, just because of, the passage of time and this and that. They moved a long way, even further away. They used to live like halfway across the state from me, and now they live halfway across the country practically. But anyway, I digress. This poor girl standing next to me is like dying of how cheesy it is, and I'm like being really earnest about it, and I'm like mumbling into my own, getting, very up close and personal with my phone. Like, I mean this, I mean it. You know, this song is all over the internet. Yeah, it's I Carry Your Heart by Connor Copede. Look up specifically Iowa All-State version for the one that has me in it, but it's a good song. But that's not the only embarrassing story I have about that song, mind you. The other embarrassing story is actually more focused on the composer, because like the thing about this song is it was composed by a Wartburg student, and that's part of why it was included. But because it was composed by a Wartburg student who had then graduated and ran off into the world to, I don't know, search for composing work or something. Actually, I think he was a high school director and also a composer. But anyway, actually, he was a director at a high school because he had a couple students from his school at that All-State, which I bet he was pleased as punch about. But anyway, I digress. This guy couldn't have been much older than I am right now. Pretty fresh out of college. And as a favor to his former choir director, and I would assume professor given his profession, he comes up in front of this crowd of, what, 500 high school students. Some of them incredibly enthused about what's going on. Some of them very bored by what's going on. They're just like, let us get back to the singing. This is what I'm here for. Some of them are incredibly enthused, like myself. I was very enthused about this. This guy gives a spiel about how composing, like how he composes. And he talks about how the piano, uh, oh boy, does he have an anecdote about the piano. He's giving a spiel about the piano and he like stops for a minute. And he stops as though he has some very sage advice to give to these young children, some of whom who are probably going to chase being a composer. And he takes a deep breath in and he goes, the piano is an instrument. And then it's dead silent in the hall. Like, did he really just say the piano is an instrument? No, duh, the piano is an instrument. And he pauses for a minute. And it rolls over in his brain what he said. And he's like, oh my goodness, let me explain. And he's, he's trying to pick up the pieces so he doesn't seem like a total goober. Which, mood, by the way, that's something I do all the time where I'm like, oh man, I got a cool thing to say. And then I say it and I go, that was not nearly as cool as what I thought it was. Let me explain myself. But anyway, this poor guy, he's the biggest thing I remember about the poor dude was the piano as an instrument because it's the funniest thing. And it's such a thing that I too do. It's very relatable. But anyway, I bring up the piano as an instrument because later on, at the actual Allstate, which was half a year later at a minimum, the composers tend to sit in on rehearsals, like the composers of all the Allstate music. If they can, they like to sit in on rehearsals because they're like, dang, this is a really high level reading of my music. I want to hear what these people bring to the table interpretation wise. And in the process of sitting in on rehearsals, occasionally you'll have some of these composers like come down into the, auditorium where you are and be like, hi, I'm the composer. Do you want me to like sign your stuff? And hang on. This is related, I promise. I hope this is the right folder. Because if it's not, it's buried somewhere. That was actually a melody of How Into the Moon. Where are my signed copies? Ha! There they are. Is this one signed? I know I have another song that's signed. It's like green. But anyway, I bring up the copies being signed. Oh yeah, this one. Okay, so I have two pieces that have been signed by the composer, as far as Iowa All-State music goes, and I treasure these copies dearly, despite what happened to them in the process of rehearsing. But that's another story. So I have Way Over in Beulah Land by Stacy V. Gibbs. Sorry, I forgot your name, dude. Sorry, but he was in rehearsal. He actually was a guest conductor in the rehearsal to like give us, what his vibe was on the music to kind of energize us. Because you can only spend so much time under one director rehearsing all day before you're like falling asleep. And Stacy V. Gibbs came in and did a guest conducting spot. Like this is what I meant by this music. And then he came out into the audience and there were hundreds of starstruck music nerds asking like, please sign my music. So I got him to sign Way Over in Beulah Land. And then additionally, this guy Connor Copine, right? He is here to keep an eye on his students mostly, but he also did during one of the 2 to 3 hour, like I should say hour breaks they gave us to like not use our voice and drink water so we didn't die. he was chilling up on the stage, right? Like on the stage steps, I should say, just having people sign stuff or like signing stuff for people. And long story, there's more to this, but I have a signed copy of "I Carry Your Heart," and I treasure it dearly because it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful piece. Um, and I love the piece, and I love what he did with it. But this is where my ability to flub things comes into this story. And so I walk up there. I am mind bogglingly nervous. Thank you, Hydration Bot. Drink 12 ounces of water. I have had a little under 32 ounces of water, but thank you, Stay Hydrated Bot. That's good of you. At anyone who's been watching all of the chunks of this stream consecutively, please drink at least 12 ounces of water. It's good for you. But anyway, I'm kind of stalling to come back to this story because Bear Paw Miner said he has something to deal with. Mm. Mm. But anyway, I've stalled long enough. This is where my ability to flub comes into the story. I walk up there. I walk up to the stage. There's this huge line because of course there is. Like every person in this auditorium's like, I love this song. Because there's always in any given set of all state music, speaking as someone who's been there twice, there are there is one piece that's just there to be the fun piece. It's not hard, it's just there. Oh, oh golly. Well, good luck helping fix their problem. I'll continue the story. In any given set of all-state music, there's one that's just there for fun. It's a good time to sing, but it's not particularly hard. There's one piece that is the hard piece that invariably is the piece that gets some people to lose their recall. So to speak, to not do well in auditions because it's violently difficult. Um, my first year that I made it, the hard piece was Zadok the Priest. It was like a coronation anthem for England, and it's hard. Like a college choir would have difficulty with it. It's hard. It's very very hard. Like there are some runs that like are probably still burned somewhere into my voice because they're that hard. I could probably go find the sheet music and sing them at you. They're that I practiced them that much. Oh, golly. Well, good night, Bear Paw Miner. Thank you for dropping in. I'm always glad to have someone active in the chat, and thank you for turning up. Feel free to come back on Friday because we're gonna be reading books. So if you like seeing my voice, yes, that's coherent. If you like hearing my voice, feel free. Anyway, back to the story. What was I saying? There's one piece that's hard, and then the rest of the pieces are just medium to semi-hard difficulty art pieces that sound really really good and will sound even more good. Like they'll sound really really good in auditions, and they sound even better with a group of 600 like incredible high school musicians. Connor Copin's piece was one of those middling difficulty, very focused on dynamics piece. Um, and so, of course, being one of the middling difficulty pieces, it wasn't the fun piece, but it wasn't the hardest piece. Being the middling difficulty piece, people were not burnt out on it thanks to lack of difficulty, like going to sleep, or burnt out on it being, this is the hardest thing, please stop making me do this. being it was one of the middling difficulty pieces, people were big fans. And it's a big, sappy, sweet, um, it lavishes in its crescendi and decrescendi. It lavishes in its dynamic contrast. It's got really sappy lyrics, and it's just it lives in its it 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 lives in its theming, and it does so earnestly in such a way that especially to emotionally vulnerable high schoolers who are going through, any manner of high school trauma or, extra normal high school trauma for that matter. It's very moving. It's moving to even, the average person, but to a high schooler like me who, there's a billion things stressing you out in high school. High school's the worst, man. Who was using music as an escape? This is a dear treasure of a song. And there were plenty of people in the auditorium along with me who considered this song a dear treasure and a wonderful work of art. So of course there's a big line for this guy to sign things, right? And he's just kind of signing things, one after another. Like, thank you, thanks for coming up here. Wow, I'm glad you like it. Sort of, public relations celebrity moment. And little old Michael, picture me. I don't have my beard. I'm what, a junior in high school at that point? I must have been a senior in high school at that point because it was my second all state. Yeah, because I went my junior and my senior year. So it's my senior year of high school. I'm still pretty young. Uh, heck, I'm still pretty young now, even though I like to joke that I'm old. Um, you know, I'm violently nervous because this was probably my favorite song from Allstate at the time. Now it's probably still one of my top of the pieces that I've done from Allstate. It's still a really good piece, but this was my favorite piece out of the program at that point because, I was somewhat early on in a relationship at that point. So I was kind of still like I was like 1 foot in the honeymoon phase. So I was the biggest sap. Like, I'm already the biggest sap in any kind of relationship, and I kind of have to quash that a little so I don't like weirds my significant other out. And I also have to, slam it into its box on camera so I'm not just being super sappy and lovey-dovey on camera and making everybody barf if I'm on camera with my significant other. And I do that with varying degrees of success in the old Kye&I videos. But anyway, I digress. So I am a big romantic sap at this point. So of course, this song is like stabbing me in the heart. I'm like, yes. And I walk up there, I wait in line, standard stuff. I decide that, oh man, I don't want to just have the music signed. What if I don't get to keep this music? I'm gonna have him sign my iPod. I have the iPod somewhere. The sign marks have rubbed off, but I have pictures of the signatures. Um, so I take the case off my iPod, put the case in my pocket, get up there. He's thankfully has a Sharpie to sign things with. He signs my piece, and he signs my iPod, and oh, this was embarrassing at the time, and it's giving me secondhand embarrassment now. Uh, as he's signing this, I there's no other descriptor besides babble. Just maximum speed. I'm like clearly starstruck, so I don't know what else to say. All that comes, I mean to say like thank you or something. I don't know. Thank him for his time. Thank him for his contribution to the world of music, and thanks to the giant pile of nerves that was laying on my brain, what comes out of my mouth is nothing other than the piano is an instrument. At like, consider consider the speed at which this was said. You all know how fast I tend to speak on occasion. You know, when I really get ahead of myself and I really start talking really fast. At that speed, at like, you know, conversational volume, thankfully. I wasn't super loud about it, but that was probably mostly as a function of how much I'd been using my voice in the past little while. But just really quickly, just the piano is an instrument, and then just rush away like, oh no, what did I say? Oh no, what did I say? I'm sorry, what did I say? And I'm still, and it's it's dumb, right? It's one of those things that like it's the dumb embarrassing story from the thing you had a great time at that you like that you don't enjoy telling because it makes you feel really stupid in hindsight. That's my dumb Allstate story. I have plenty of like really cool Allstate stories, like, but that's my dumb Allstate story. At least from my second year of Allstate. I don't remember my dumb Allstate story from the. I lied. I do remember my dumb Allstate story from the first year, but I'm not telling it right now. it's it's an adventure of a story. I think I've told it on the channel before. I will tell you it involves sleepwalking, and that's all I'll tell you. It was a really embarrassing story. It was really embarrassing at the time, but once it worked out, it was really very much something to laugh at. But it was very much like a source of stress at the time because like the the way things had shaken out, like the teacher was not a fan of what had happened. He was very upset, and I was worried down to my bones that it was gonna get me off of the All-State team, so to speak. And that terrified me because it was like the only thing I was invested in beyond cross country, and like I was mostly doing cross country to talk to people at that point. And I didn't want to like the thing with Allstate for me anyway was, don't get me wrong, my high school had a good choral program, but as in many high schools, there are a very limited amount of people who care about the music that is being made. But in the process of Allstate, you have to care. You have to care, and you have to have a high, high level of skill. And that was wondrous for me to go from a choir where not everybody necessarily cared about the music that was being made, but everybody, you know, at least could sing past it. You know, they could carry a tune and they had some kind of musical talent, mostly, at least in the audition group. But the vast difference in just even the training camp of Allstate and my normal high school choir was so wonderful to me to hear what it sounded like to have everyone in the group care about what's going on. It made Allstate a very important experience for me at the time. And understandably, I was very, very worried about not being able to do it. Because at that time, I had tried out for Allstate once, didn't make it, was in the process of going to camps to try out for the second time. And that's, anyway, that's that part of the story you're gonna get. Oh, also, I've definitely told this story in year zero, but not in the proper channel. Um, it's funny. I've met every every one of my significant others so far through choir. I've definitely told the story of how I've met Kye before. I think I told it in a video with Kye. How I met the girl before Kye, I don't know that I've told the story, but it boils down to I was smooth for a total of 2 minutes this girl was taken off guard by the fact that I was smooth for a total of 2 minutes. Ran with it. We started dating. Dated for 2 years, I think. And then things just kind of... I think she left me, and then... Yeah, that's what happened. She left me, and I was really, burnt up about it, and then the passage of time happened, and now I'm just like, oh, well, it happened. You know? I don't know if I've told the entire story of how I met this girl. So... Very young me. I must have been a sophomore in high school. I was a sophomore in high school because it was the year I didn't make it to All-State. That's why I was there. So, if you don't make it to All-State, there are a few music festivals that exist for kids who didn't make it to All-State but still put all this work in and they want to perform the music. One of them is the one in question that we're on about today. I don't remember which college it's at. I think... Oh, I lied. I do. It's at Iowa Wesleyan. And so, I'm at this Iowa Wesleyan festival, right? And I'm having a good time. It's like, yeah, man, I'm down. We get to make this music that I worked on. Even though I didn't like most of the pieces that year, some of them sucked. Some of them were good, though. Actually, mostly the ones that I didn't like were the two end of the spectrum pieces, the one that was the easy fun piece and the one that was too hard. But I digress. So I've been at this camp for the whole day. Lunchtime rolls around, and the whole time we're rehearsing, there's this alto off to my right. Because, when you sit in choral sections, there's like usually tenor, bass, alto, soprano, right? And they had the tenor bass in one set of auditorium seats and the alto sopranos in the other set of seats, and there's an aisle between us. And there's this girl across the aisle from me. And she's like singing alto, and I'm like, hey, she's kind of cute. I'm single. Let's find out if she's single. I do this in the worst possible way. Never do this thing that I'm about to tell you. It is the worst possible pickup line. So, we break for lunch, right? We go have lunch, we come back. There's still some time. So, of course, as, it's an auditorium full of teenagers, there's gonna be people talking. There's gonna be large groups of people talking. But the thing is, this was an all-state thing, so there's just gloms of certain people from certain schools. I broke off from the glom of people from my school because it was literally consisted of me, the choir director, and this one girl whose name escapes me, but she was really nice. Wonderful alto. I don't know if she was even there. I think she made it and I did. No, wait, we both didn't make it that year, so we both went to this festival. But anyway, I break off from the, my high school group, and I go wander around. I'm like, I'm looking for this alto girl, right? And I find her in a group of, it's her, and 3 of her friends, if I remember right. So I saunter up to this group of people, and I'm just kind of standing there awkwardly. Which, I'll admit this is a failing of mine in normal life. I kind of just stand there awkwardly until I find a point to jump into the conversation. And it's a little awkward. But anyway, I stand there awkwardly for a little bit, and I find a point to jump into the conversation. So I jump into this conversation with a fun fact, right? So I'm like, they were talking about something about vision. I remember, because this is what's roped my fun fact in. So then I jump in with my fun fact, like, hey, I learned something about pupils the other day. They're like, what did you learn about pupils? And I'm like, what was the fact? This is the important part of the story. Oh, it's your pupils dilate when you see someone you love or someone you hate. But the only difference is, when you see someone you love, generally your heart rate increases. I don't know if this...
I don't know if this is a real fact. I got it off of like an image macro.
But whatever, they bought it, right? So I'm in the conversation now. So I'm like in this group and I'm like trying to chat along as best as I can with my, middling high school social skills. Eventually, I'm like watching these girls' eyes, right? Because I was on about this pupil fact and I'm curious. So then I'm like, it comes up and I'm like, y'all, I want to test something. All three y'all. Originally, it was going to be all three of them, but you'll see why not. Um, I say, y'all, I want to test something. I got this fact off of like an image macro, and I don't know if it's a real thing. So you and I point at this girl that is who we were talking about earlier. I point at this girl and I say, you're my first test subject. We're gonna see what happens here. And it is the most like now in hindsight, it is the most anime thing. Um, this I'm like now walk over here a little ways. So we separate a little ways from the group, so the group's kind of like audiencing us, if that makes any sense. And I'm like, okay, stand against this wall, and she's like standing against this brick wall. And I swear to Hylia, I like anime like uh like romance anime trope this girl against the wall. Like my hands are like near her shoulders, like the whole spiel about like pin them to the wall without actually pinning them to the wall. Oh my god, this is the most embarrassing. Don't do this. Don't do this. This is the worst pickup line. But anyway, I'll get to why it's a pickup line now. I'll shut up and keep telling my story. So this girl, I have her against the wall, and I'm like, all right, now look at me, and she looks at me, and then I'm like, all right, now look away, and like her pupils like do their thing like normally. I'm like, all right, that's a good control. Okay, now look at me again, and as she's looking at me, I'm like over my glasses looking at her in the eyes, like very seriously. And her pupils dilate, and I'm like, and immediately, like, in the back of my head, I'm like, oh no, she hates me. And I'm like, clearly, like, trying not to panic. And I'm like, okay, okay, okay. Um, look over there again. Let me take your pulse. I want to make sure if this is, what I'm seeing is what I'm seeing. And so she's like, okay. So she looks off into the distance, and I put my hand right here to get her pulse. Couldn't have done something less intimate, you dingus. I get real up close and personal. I've got a finger on both of her pulse points on her neck. And I say, all right, I've got a baseline for your pulse. I've got a baseline for your eyes. Now look at me. I've got I've got my fingers on her neck, and she looks into my eyes, and I'm looking back into her eyes, and her pupils dilate, and her pulse like noticeably increases, and within half of a second, if not less, I am like I literally did this to like turn away from her, and I'm laughing. I'm like bent over laughing. I'm like, yes, really. I am like bent over laughing. I am losing it. And she's like, "What? What do you mean? What are you going on about? Explain yourself." And I'm like trying to compose myself. I was literally holding my nose. By the way, like when I'm doing this, this is part of the story. This was probably what I was doing. And I'm like, well, have something to tell you. I saw your pupils move, right? And she goes, yeah. And I'm like, well, when I saw your pupils move, I was like, oh no, you hate me. And I went, and then and she was like, well, why are you, why are you laughing if I hate you then? And I'm like, well, You see, that's why I asked about your pulse, and she's like, no, and I'm like, yep. And that's my really embarrassing story for the evening. Um, that's how I met my high school girlfriend. Well, the better part of high school anyway. Well, yeah, like the a larger chunk of high school, I should say. That poor girl. She had the worst possible pickup line used on her, and she still ran with it. She must have, she must have seen something in me, because like if she didn't, she would have not put up with any kind of what I was doing. That was the worst possible pickup line. Please don't try that on anyone. It's real bad. Also, the now that we've blithered about my embarrassing stories for a few hours, like an hour and a half, the Octo expansion's finally almost done. We might actually get to experience this for all of 10 minutes before I have to go pass out. And you know what? It's not even worth tagging this as Octo expansion because, well, I mean, Twitch wise, it's worth tagging it as Octo expansion. YouTube wise, it's not going to be because it'll have posted like 4 weeks after the Octo expansion. Oh, hey, Commander Root, you've been in here the whole time. I saw you earlier and I didn't say anything because Bear Paw Miner was in here and I was like interacting with him in the chat. Them, I suppose, would be the better pronoun. Because, like, I don't know. I don't know. Gender is weird. Pronouns are weird. Speech is weird. Anyway, I was interacting with Bear Paw Miner earlier and I didn't catch you being in the chat. I'm glad to see you, Commander Root. I'm always glad to see a regular. You've been dropping by during the paper cut streams, especially, and that makes me happy. I'm always glad to see people in here. Anyway, you know what? I gotta use the restroom because I've been drinking a lot of water. So I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna put up the BRB, and hopefully when I come back, this will have been. Hopefully when I come back, this will have finished downloading. So, play nice, everybody. Okay. I'll